Hello, everyone, and welcome to our lecture on evaluative arguments. Take 13 or whatever this is. Sorry about it not being up earlier. Apparently, we've run into some more tech glitches. C'est la vie. But, anyways, let's set all of that aside and start working on our next style of argument, the evaluative argument. So as a little bit of a review, we've already done two types of argumentation in this class. The first was the causal, aka I have a problem, and how did this problem get started? What contributed to this becoming a problem? And then our last essay was the resemblance essay, where we are stating that some sort of thing underneath your research topic belongs within a particular category or is the same as something else that we normally wouldn't consider to be the same. And as far as that categorization, it's also putting something in a category that we wouldn't necessarily think of it being in. And your argument is like, yeah, it really should be in there. Or possibly you could do the opposite. We usually think it's in this category, but it actually doesn't belong. Resemblance arguments are a lot more objective because the comparisons are not based on opinion, they're based on facts. X did this, Y did this. X has this, Y has this, right? There's not really a whole lot of opinion going on there. It's just basic fact. And then as far as category, most categories typically have a pretty set list of criteria that something has to fulfill to be within that category or to be without that category. So it is going to be a lot more objective. This essay, however, is the evaluative, and a lot of us are already accidentally writing evaluative essays anyway. So this is one that we should be a lot more familiar with because you are making a judgment call or an assessment. It's much more subjective, but it does have a lot of rhetorical appeals to back it up, ethos, pathos, and logos. You are fully going to be supporting this logically. It is not just your opinion, okay? But it is going to be making a judgment call. Most of the time, when you see the word should, like we should do this, or this should be considered, all right, most of the time we're talking about evaluatives. So what can an evaluative argument do? Very common places for us to see evaluation arguments are in reviews, so different types of media, so movie reviews, TV show reviews, music, podcasts, so on and so forth. You have product reviews. A lot of us are really used to reading those like before we buy something online to see if other people had problems with that product. You will also see people evaluating policies, laws, and regulations all the time. And these can be at different levels. They can be global, national, local, company, or school based, whatever. So you could have somebody say, okay, well, the MACC policy of moving all classes online in the face of COVID-19 was, and then you can make your evaluative claim. Social and ethical codes can also be evaluated, looking at what is believed to be true or appropriate in a society or culture. And this is going to blend a lot more into that ethical essay that we do at the very end of the semester, but I did want to bring this up because your evaluation is going to go hand in hand with your ethical claim. For us, however, in this class, we are going to be focusing specifically on some kind of policy within your research topic and evaluating it. So we are going to stop for a moment and take a break for a little activity, little assignment here. So my activity for you is we are going to go to evaluation activity number 1 under the assignments, and you are going to read the essay about the zombie apocalypse. And there is a worksheet analysis that if you keep scrolling down past the essay and past the source citations, there's a worksheet that asks you several questions about that. You want to upload your completed worksheet to Canvas. For some of you that are going to be marking things on the essay itself, instead of copying and pasting, you're going to upload the whole thing. And you want to do this individually. No group grades for this one. I want to see what each of you are seeing, thinking, and feeling when you read this evaluation essay, which this one is actually technically about a product, not a policy, but it is a rather amusing take on it, rather fun, and gives you the idea of how you could structure arguments and maybe some ways that you might not want to. Okay, so now that you have that assignment done, let's go into what we are going to be doing for our research paper, which is evaluating a policy. So your job is going to be to find a controversial policy within your topic, pick a side, and then make an evaluative claim from that side that can be logically supported. Okay? It has to have objective data to support the claim. All right? And when I say that you have to have objective data, it means don't have super biased sources. Okay? Make sure that your sources are academically credible. It cannot be about personal experiences unless they are professionally quantified. And that means that I don't want, well, because this happened to me, or because this happened to so and so, therefore, all right, that is heading you right down the road to a lot of logical fallacies, hasty generalization being one of them. And we really want to avoid using the idea that just because it happened to one, therefore it should apply to all. Now, there are cases in which you might find like a single case or even a small minority collection of cases would make for a powerful argument. But for the most part, I don't foresee that happening for any of you in your papers. If you do feel like that is a situation that is true for your paper and authentic for your paper and you really want to use it, talk to me about it and we'll see what we can do about it. Personal testimony in an evaluation of a policy is almost never encouraged because it's going to be highly biased. And that's just the way that it is. Can you use some of your personal testimony in the introduction and conclusion? Possibly. If you were doing this as far as like a speech that you were giving in some sort of like maybe giving a speech to an organization or to a governing body in order to change things, and you want to use your personal story as a very powerful pathos appeal, that can definitely work and it can be very effective. There are lots of examples of how that can be. But as far as an academic research paper, we're going to stray away from personal testimony as much as we possibly can. The only exception to that being possibly in the introduction and conclusion, but that's still kind of iffy. If you really, really want to do this and you really feel strongly about it, absolutely let me know, and I will help you craft this in a way that it doesn't sound incredibly one-sided. Now, the difference about an evaluation essay versus the other two essays that we've done is that this one does allow you to play with the implications of your problem or your policy. And that is because, like in causal, it didn't matter what the effects were of the problem. It just mattered what caused the problem. And in the resemblance, it didn't really matter what it meant to be in a category or not be in a category. Our full argument was, does it belong in the category? Not what could happen if it is or if it isn't. With an evaluation essay, we now get to play with implications. Because if we're saying that such and such is detrimental to our economy, not only can we prove how is it going to harm our economy, but we can also look at the implications of that. Maybe greater unemployment, maybe greater risk of domestic violence and child abuse because families are under more stress financially and unhealthy families can take that out on each other. You can play with those implications. Now, we don't want to go too far with these and end up on a slippery slope argument, but we can use them in this essay. So for a lot of you who are struggling in previous essays and getting notes from me about like these are implications or these are the effects, this is where you can put it in. All right. So let's look at an example of somebody evaluating a policy. So in this case, we're going to use our class example of the abortion debate, and our policy is going to be the heartbeat law. And we are going to pick, for this example, the more pro-choice side of things and say that the heartbeat law unfairly legislates a woman's access to abortion. Okay? You see that word, unfairly? That's a judgment. That's an assessment. That makes this evaluation. If we were to say the heartbeat law legislates a woman's access to abortion, that's just a statement of fact. That's not even an argument. It just is. But our evaluation is saying what it's doing is unfair. So my main points are going to focus in on my evaluative claim. How is it unfair? All right, so my first point. Heartbeats can usually be heard around 6 weeks gestation, although many women may not suspect they are pregnant until after this time period elapses. So because the heartbeat law would not allow you to get an abortion after that heartbeat can be heard on a sonogram, this is unfair to women because they may not even know that they're pregnant until after that point, and therefore they're not getting a choice. So how would I support this? I would find scientific evidence of when a heartbeat can be found, the prevalence of irregular cycles in women. Because if you have a very irregular cycle and it's like, oh, well, I normally only have a period every 2 months, and you happen to get pregnant right after one of your periods, you might not suspect anything until 10 weeks along that, hey, I usually have another period around now, and it's kind of weird. And lo and behold, you're 10 weeks pregnant. You had no idea because not all women have pregnancy symptoms or notice pregnancy symptoms, or sometimes those symptoms can be masked by other conditions that the woman has. Other things than pregnancy can cause a late or lost period, high stress, low weight, or losing a lot of weight very quickly. Some medications or procedures or side effects to those procedures. And so just because you have a late or lost period, it doesn't necessarily mean that, it's normal for you or it's your fault. It's just something that happened. And so you didn't immediately think pregnancy. Maybe you thought, I have been working out at the gym every single day for my gymnastics trial, and that's probably why I don't have a period right now. And in essence, because it's ignoring all of these reasons why a woman may not know or may not suspect a pregnancy by the time that they hit 6 weeks, which is usually about when that heartbeat can be found, it does not give women a full opportunity to make a decision before it's taken. Right? And that is a problem. That is unfair. All right, another point. It gives greater reproductive freedom to women who have greater access to health care or testing supplies. If a woman doesn't have the ability to get an early doctor's appointment or cannot afford regular testing supplies just in case she might get pregnant, she would be less likely to know before the deadline and wouldn't be given the same opportunity of choice. And we often think, oh, well, there's $1 pregnancy tests. Well, how accurate are they? And what if they seriously can't afford a $1 pregnancy test? Or what if they're not available? What if she's not old enough to purchase one? As far as the doctor's appointments, not all people have that kind of access or can go to urgent care, especially like right now that we're kind of on lockdown. A lot of access to physicians has been cut off because they're so focused on the pandemic that a lot of other things are kind of getting shifted. So you might not get the care that you normally would. So where would I find supporting details for this main point? I'd look at costs of supplies for testing and how this could impact someone, especially of the lower socioeconomic status, especially testing that tends to be more accurate because that actually would matter. The cost of healthcare, the number of women who do not have any access or do not have reliable access to healthcare. There are statistics out there about that. Another main point, it doesn't take into consideration the complicated nature of establishing early pregnancy. A lot of people think it's super easy. Either you're pregnant or you're not. Well, as far as your body is concerned, I mean, yes, theoretically that's true, but how your body responds to it will vary from woman to woman to woman to woman, and even from pregnancy to pregnancy. Some women will have very early symptoms very early on that are very strong, but with their next child, they don't. Or maybe they always do, but a whole bunch of other women will not have a lot of early symptoms. Some women may not pop positive on a blood or urine test depending on what their HCG levels are. It is possible to get pregnant and have lower levels for a short time, usually during that early testing stage, sometimes even as far up to the first trimester. So it would look like maybe you're pregnant, or you probably aren't pregnant, or you're not pregnant, even though they truly are. It's just that the hormone levels are a little bit low. Conception can take place days or even up to a week after sex, so timing the test appropriately could be problematic. So making sure that you're taking that test whenever those hormones would be in production. So if you're like, oh, I had sex on Saturday, and if I want to see if I'm pregnant, I should probably test like 2 Saturdays from then. But what if you had sex on Saturday, but the egg wasn't fertilized until that following Friday? Then you're going to be taking that test almost a week early, and depending on the sensitivity of that test, it might not pick it up. Then you'd be like, oh, it's negative, and go on with your life, and lo and behold, later on, you're positive. So this is another reason why it's unfair. Another reason why it's unfair is that it implicates that a heartbeat is synonymous with life. We don't have scientific proof that a heartbeat is the determining factor of life. It would be a determining factor. Usually if your heart is not beating, you're not considered alive. But there's no scientific consensus on what life is and where life begins. We have a lot of different theories, but we're not united. We're not all calibrated on this. And so for a lawmaker to just determine that that heartbeat is that stage may not be taking into consideration all of the scientific data out there. We also have the idea of, let's take this further. If the heartbeat is considered the determining factor of life, and that's why I can't get an abortion after 6 weeks, what about the patients who are brain dead and yet they have a heartbeat? Their brains are not working. Their mind is gone. They cannot function. They're not considered viable. And they are allowed to die or be taken off life support. But they have a heartbeat. How do we explain that? How do we correlate that? 3D printed hearts can be fully functional. There was an article not too long ago about 3D printing a mouse heart, and it worked. So, is it alive? Is that heart alive? If a heartbeat is the determining factor of life, is anything with a heartbeat alive, including an artificial heartbeat? And then what do you have with the people that have like pacemakers? There's all sorts of like little things in here that we can get into, sort of like the philosophy of determining life by one particular standard. There's a lot of exceptions to this rule that we would have to consider. And so if you're going to say, oh, well, this person can have a heartbeat and yet they can be killed, or this can technically have a heartbeat because it was manufactured in a lab, although we have babies that are manufactured in labs nowadays, it's not really alive. But a fetus in a womb is. And it doesn't all add up. Okay? So those are just some examples of what you could do to support that evaluative claim, that this is unfair. And all of those main points are focused on how it's unfair, because it's not following logic. It's not allowing for reasonable considerations. Okay? So how could we counter-argument and refute a counter-argument for this paper? Okay? So somebody might say, as there is no consensus scientifically on what constitutes life, making a concession, a line has to be drawn somewhere, and the heartbeat is a logical place to do so. Okay? And that makes sense as a counter-argument, right? Because most of the time, if your heart stops beating, you're considered dead. And if you do have your heart beating, you are still considered alive. that does make sense. However, how can we refute that? Most definitions of life also include the ability to eat and excrete and to reproduce. A fetus with a heartbeat is not able to do those functions yet. So is it fully alive? Right? Do you see how that works really well to counter that argument when they're saying, well, we have to draw a line somewhere, and this is, in all the definitions of life? Well, there's a lot of other things that are in all those definitions of life too. Why are you picking that one over the others? The time period in which a heartbeat can be found is also when reactions to pain can be found. Therefore, if we are trying to avoid the suffering of another being by drawing a line before the fetus could knowingly experience harm through the abortion procedure, the safely measurable point of the heartbeat ensures that any procedure would be done before the fetus has the ability to be harmed by it. Now, this counter-argument is actually giving a pretty big concession. They're saying, okay, you can have your abortions as long as it's not harming another life. And by harming, like, they are feeling that harm. And since we are now realizing that fetuses at this stage are reacting to pain, therefore, by the time they have a heartbeat, they can feel pain. And so it would be considered inhumane to cause this kind of devastating pain to another being. And that's why the heartbeat isn't unfair. It's trying to protect the fetus from harm. Okay, interesting point. Let's see how we can refute that. Determining whether a fetus is experiencing or reacting to pain is still debatable and has not been conclusively proven. It would also be a very ethically difficult standard to set up. So if we know that, for example, if we suspect that a fetus would start feeling pain somewhere around that 6 to 8 weeks category, like, how do you ethically go about testing that? You just keep poking it with a stick and seeing if it cringes, like, what are the ethical implications of, like, semi-torturing a human being, or what could be a human being, in order to find out where their pain threshold is and when they start experiencing pain? I mean, that's a very difficult thing to do, especially if you're someone who is, like, pro-life and supportive of all life. Like, how can you defend the kind of testing that we would have to do in order to completely definitively know when a fetus can experience pain? Another refutation, if we didn't want to go that direction. Other living things are killed, despite clear reactions to pain, in order to make human life better, such as the slaughter of animals for food and safety, or the killing of viruses, bacteria, and parasites. We do this all the time. And none of them really enjoy being killed. Most living creatures avoid death, unless you're a lemming. So, like, how are you saying that, like, this fetus needs to be protected, but we have a culture where we don't protect other things? And if your argument is we're supposed to avoid harm of other beings, well, we're harming other beings all the time, even beings that are within our being, like the viruses, bacteria, and parasites. Or if this is solely regarding reducing human suffering, all right, if that is your counter argument, you just want to reduce human suffering, then the potential and real suffering of the mother carrying the child must also be considered. Right? And all of these refutations would then be developed, and we would give logical support and pathos support for all of them. Okay? It's not just going to be this one statement. You're going to go on and really explain what this means and show the implications, because we can do that in evaluative essays. All right, so let's pause for a moment. And we're going to do something rather fun, rather creative, a group evaluation. So you're going to look for the assignment for evaluation activity 2 group. You're going to watch the embedded video for your group to see what your options are. I had a little wheel that just randomly chose 4 claims and 4 policies. So they're completely randomly selected. I didn't set up anybody for success or failure. There's good options in all of them. You're going to follow the instructions using creative logic. Try to avoid the fallacies if you can. And even a sense of the ridiculous or absurd to prove your claims. No source support is necessary. Just kind of have some fun with this. Each of you will upload your random policy evaluation to Canvas. And there is an example of me doing this myself, and you can watch me like go through the thinking process and how I am filling out the basic outline of my evaluative argument, and so that you can kind of get an idea of how this would work. So go ahead, take a moment, watch the video for your group, get into your group discussion board, or you can get on to whatever other platform your group is using, and start chatting about this and seeing like which ones are you going to put together and how are you going to create an argument out of this. Okay, so now that you're done with that, or at least getting it started, let's move on to some possible pitfalls of evaluation where evaluation essays go wrong. The most common thing that happens is that there is way too much bias, and that leads to logical fallacies. We see this in a lot of arguments that tend to be very controversial, or that tend to have special interest groups attached, or that tend to have like religious or moral implications. So, for example, animal testing sometimes can lead to a lot of logical fallacies, because if you're looking at what PETA says about animal testing versus what the scientific community says about animal testing, you're going to get two very biased views. Obviously, the scientific community needs to continue doing animal testing because they need to perform their tests, and it's more ethical to do it on an animal than it is a human, which is slightly debatable in and of itself, but overall, that's consensus. PETA is going to have extremely different views. And by depending on either one of them, we can get a lot of bias in here. So you have to be very careful to watch how biased your arguments are. Do they have enough objective logos in there? Are you avoiding logical fallacies? Or are you, if you're finding tons and tons of pathos in your sources, that could be a sign that they're very heavily biased. Insufficient evidentiary support. This happens all the time. People make claims or counterclaims or refutations, and they don't prove it. All right, so if you're going to say that heartbeat law is unfair, you better be listing out several reasons and then explaining those reasons. It's not just enough to say not all women are going to know by 6 weeks that they're pregnant. You have to show me why that happens, how common it is, and how it is a huge disservice to these women. And that's going to take sentences, maybe paragraphs, that's going to take sources. Okay, so make sure that you're really supporting your claims. Unbalanced rhetoric is another big problem, especially the balance between pathos and logos. Evaluation claims, because they can be very biased and because they have a propensity to logical fallacies, usually can end up a little bit more on the pathos side than on the logos side. And so you have a lot of emotional arguments as to why we should consider something unfair or unethical, or why something should be changed, but we're not getting a whole lot of logic behind it. And, we're seeing that now. A lot of the policies that are changing in our country and in our world over the global pandemic, how many of them are based on logic? How many of them are based on emotion and fear and panic? And how important it is that governing bodies are able to sort through the emotion and sort through the logic and try to find a way to balance that, because you can't just ignore the fact that people are afraid, or that people are dying, or that people are stressed, or that people are losing their jobs and their homes and their livelihoods. Like, that cannot be ignored. But we also need to have some logical support for this, and we can't just depend on the emotions of the situation. Another big pitfall of evaluation is how you are wording your claim in your thesis. Okay? There is a big difference between using more nebulous or non-specific, generic, vague words that can mean lots of different things, and using a more specific claim that gives us a very good direction. All right, so this policy is unfair. This particular one is the one that we just used in our example. And I was able to show pretty clearly, pretty logically, how it is unfair because it causes a lot of problems for women who wouldn't necessarily know that they're pregnant right away for a lot of very valid reasons. And so that does very clearly go underneath something being unfair. Um, if you are going to use this in your essay, you're going to have to be just as detailed and just as targeted, because unfair can also be one of those words that ends up being kind of generic. Well, what does it really mean to be unfair? And is that really a standard that we want to be arguing over anyway, right? So making sure that you're picking stronger adjectives or even just stronger claims, like this policy should be overturned. Okay, that's specific, very specific. This policy should be amended to include X. Again, very specific. That's worded really well. The other example, this policy discriminates against deaf and hard of hearing workers. This one on the surface level looks really specific and really awesome. And it could be if there was like a lot of nuance going on within the policy that would show many different ways that it's discriminating against this population. However, chances are it's not that nuanced, and it's more like a couple of facts or one issue. And so that would be something that would be really hard to develop to the kind of depth that we're looking at in this essay. Okay, so be aware of going too general, too vague, that's hard to defend, or going so specific that you don't have enough to say or enough to really support it. All right. So if I am going to write my evaluation essay, what do I need to remember? Use unbiased and objective sources as much as possible. Definitely check for bias. I highly recommend going to the library database and not just Google for these, because you're going to get more bias sources on Google than you will on the library database. And unless you're really spending time looking for it, you may miss it. We also need to have very balanced rhetoric for each supporting point and refutation, being careful not to let our pathos overpower our logos or vice versa, or skipping ethos altogether. Remember, everything needs to be supported by credible sources. Avoid logical fallacies. The ones that tend to pop up the most in evaluation arguments are hasty generalizations. This happened to one, therefore it's going to happen to everybody. Bandwagons, everybody else is doing it, therefore we should too. Ad hominem attacks, where you're just saying, well, the people who don't agree, and it doesn't have to be as explicit as like they're idiots, but just the way that you present them as like with their counter argument. If their counter argument looks like really terrible and you're using a straw man argument, you're basically completely demeaning the other side. And if there wasn't a logical and valuable reason for the other side, you wouldn't have a controversial policy in the first place. Okay? So we need to make sure that we are attacking the policy, not the people. Okay? And slippery slopes. It is very easy, especially now that we're allowing implications to come in, to start saying, oh, well, because of this, it's going to lead to this, which is going to lead to this, which is going to lead to this, which is going to lead to this. And usually it's something completely catastrophic or at the very bottom of the dunghill. All right. So what you could say for an example of this is, if we allow the heartbeat law, then governments are going to take complete control over people's health. They are going to start rationing out who gets what. They are going to start determining who has the right to life and who doesn't. And the government is going to completely take the rights to our own bodies and our own lives and our own destinies completely out of our hands. That is a slippery slope. Okay? That is a logical fallacy. There is no proof that just the heartbeat law is going to turn into a complete totalitarian dictatorship of a government that is going to turn everybody into pawns with absolutely no choice. Okay? There's no logical proof for that. Right? It may feel that way. It may feel that it's possible, but logically we know a lot of steps would have to come in between A and Z for that to happen. And chances are there's no way that would be allowed to happen. You want to keep on topic with your specific policy. Do not go off on topically related points that do not support your overall policy decision. So if your policy is no child left behind, if your policy is the banning of declawing of cats, if your policy is anyone under the age of 18 caught doing pornography has to undergo mandatory counseling and a treatment program. Okay, you want to keep on topic with those things, all right, and make sure that all of your main points are supporting that specific policy choice. So, like, for anyone who's underage in pornography, I mean, yeah, human trafficking can be a very related subject, but that's not the specific policy you're talking about. You don't have to be human trafficked in order to be underage and in pornography. Does it happen? Yes. Could it be an element? Possibly, but it shouldn't be your main focus. Okay. Cats being declawed, being considered inhumane, and you want to put a ban on that, then we probably aren't also going to be talking about microchipping cats or, the issues with docking dogs' tails. I mean, they can be kind of topically related, but they're not your specific policy. Stay focused. And finally, remember, you are not categorizing or comparing. That was resemblance. You are making a clear, decisive judgment on a policy and defending your well-supported opinion. Okay? That being said, I do not want to see I think, or we should, or I want in your paper. Okay? No more first person. You can express your opinion without using first person voice. Okay? The heartbeat law is unfair. You know what my opinion is, but I didn't use the word I in there anywhere. Okay? So you can use your structure and your grammar and your tone to give us very clearly that this is your well-supported opinion without you having to use I once. Not the letter I, but capital I, the subject pronoun. You know what I mean. All right? So let's pause here for another evaluation activity break. So for activity number 3, you are going to pull up the assignment, evaluation activity number 3 on Canvas. I tried to make these as easy for you guys to find as possible. You can do this either individually or as a group. I actually need to change this a little bit. So hang on with me, because I wrote this and recorded this originally before we made the changes that were posted yesterday about group work, okay? But you can still do activity 3 either individually or as a group, and you're going to complete an assessment on one of the sample essays that are listed underneath the evaluation activity number 3 assignment, okay? It's going to have 3 different Word documents, and all of them are going to have an assessment at the end of the essay. You're going to pick one, fill out the assessment, submit it to Canvas. If you are doing this as a group, You need to write down everybody's names on it, and then each of you individually are going to be submitting it. Okay? If you do it individually, you didn't have groups helping you with your assessment, then you would still upload it yourself to Canvas. Okay? As far as not having to be the same groups you work in for other assignments, it'll make things slightly more complicated as far as making sure that you guys can have contact with each other, because your discussion boards are based on your assigned groups, but you can always use the main classroom discussion board to get in contact with people, or you can send them messages through Canvas. So if you really want to create your own group that isn't your assigned group, it is possible. It'll be slightly more complicated, but I can help you work through that if you really, really want to. But yes, everybody has to have their names on it if they worked on it together, and everybody has to submit it. Okay? There is a bonus opportunity for this one. If you want, you do not have to, but if you want, you can fill out one extra assessment for another sample evaluative essay. So there's 3 in that assignment. So you have to do one, either individually or as a group. You can do one more for bonus points. And then there's another assignment on Canvas called Evaluative Bonus Activity, and that's where you're going to upload your extra one should you choose to do it. Okay? And it needs to be uploaded underneath that second one, because that second one is designed in Canvas to work as bonus credit, so that if other people choose not to do this, they're not getting penalized. Okay?